Hi, everyone. We are going to talk about the history and growth of PR in the first part of our lesson this week. So let's jump right into it. Even though PR is an industry that didn't really start until we had some mass communication technology, such as radio and TV, there were certain strategies and elements of PR that we can look back and see that people were using way back in the very beginning. So we're going to look at, first of all, a lot of this is in your book. Some of them are just my thoughts. Um, but the era of ancient PR was when people, of course, we didn't have the media technology that we have today. But someone like John the Baptist was an advanced man for Jesus. He was spreading the word that the Messiah would be coming and would be on his way. And so he was much like what some of our advanced people do today, where he was publicizing an event. Same with the Olympics in ancient Athens. Men would go out and communicate that the Olympics were coming up and for people to come watch and to see them. Also, the first time that we've had the use of the word propaganda was in the 17th century, and Pope Gregory established a college of propaganda to try to spread news about the Catholic faith. Now, I don't really, the word propaganda has changed meaning from then to now. We see propaganda more in negative terms as a government or a big institutional group is trying to spread a certain message without having a fair look at that message. But propaganda back then was more about spreading information. It was more about persuasion, sharing the faith. It has much more of a negative term today. Another example is Lady Godiva, who was trying to protest an event, and she rode a horse nude through the village so that she could get attention towards the event. Eric the Red in 1000, he discovered a land of rock and ice that, of course, he then named Greenland as a way to try to communicate and get more settlers to come to what he called Greenland. So he was using some deceptive imagery and practices to communicate about this new land that he wanted people to come settle on. The Boston Tea Party, some people have called this the most important, the most established type of advocacy that PR stunt that we've ever had. This was, of course, promoting settlement in colonial America. The Americans did not like the taxes that they were being forced to pay without having representation. And so there was this struggle for independence. And so Sam Adams and his group decided to throw some tea in to raid their ship and throw some tea into the water and create create support, make a statement. So it was very much a staged event to try to get knowledge and communication out about their point of view. Then we have, of course, we've had hints of deceptive hype in what I've been talking about. But also during this time of press agentry, when circuses and exhibitions were trying to promote certain personalities, such as Daniel Boone and Buffalo Bill, some of them were, legitimate communication techniques. Many of them were very much exaggerated to the point of being lies. That is something that we don't want to practice, of course, today in PR. A press agent would take tickets to an editor's desk along with announcements so that the editor and his family could go to the event and also spread the news about the event as well. But some of these were using techniques that we would not promote today. Also, Barnum and Bailey, as you've heard of Barnum Bailey Circus, he was a master of using these written and verbal PR techniques with big ads and newspaper coverage. He often used, though, deception and hoaxes in his publicity, which was not good. Tom Thumb was, 30 inches tall? And he was a very entertaining performer. So he used this man and used his image and his performance ability to attract crowds to the circus that he was hosting in whatever town he was in. There's also an example of Joyce Heth, who was um, the nurse to the infant George Washington. Joyce Heth was an older African American woman. Barnum and Bailey bought out her story, her rights, and took her on a trip around the country with him so that people could see her. He also marketed her as being the oldest woman in the world, 160 something years old. And that wasn't true. She was already elderly and not in good health, and she died not long after that. They did an autopsy, found that she was more in her 70s or 80s. But used a lot of, these are just a couple of examples of how he kind of took advantage of people to promote his circuses and his events that he was hosting around the country. So it was kind of like an idea of a pseudo event. So a pseudo event could be a good strategy to use, but not when you're using deception or you are taking advantage of people as well. In the early 1900s, this is when really we see the PR beginning in a more strategic way. Amos Kendall was the first press secretary. We know, you hear about press secretaries today, whether it be Sarah Huckabee Sanders or Sean Spicer or Dee Dee Myers for President Clinton. There's been many of them, that they are the spokesperson for the president and, giving out a daily brief up to the media and also to the public about the president's schedule and the president's viewpoints. Teddy Roosevelt also was a master of using political strategy to make public messages about his viewpoints. So he was also one of the first presidents to kind of take that approach. Activists also started using PR strategies, abolitionists against slavery, prohibitionists against alcohol, and even women's rights advocates. So all of these people were using different techniques of publicity, communication, information, persuasion to put forth their point of view. In the same time period, the industrialists started needing some help because the problem was that there was seen as being uncaring owners who they were only wanting to make a profit and didn't care about the welfare of their workers. Kind of sounds sort of like some of the things we're hearing about today as well. So what, though, that owners did was to hire public information people to get out their viewpoints and to share their stories. So one of those was Ivy Ledbetter Lee. He has formed the first PR firm in 1916, Lee, Harrison Lee, and he was really the first PR counselor. There, again, we had the stubborn management and labor strife that was happening at this time. Ivy Ledbetter Lee used really good techniques, though, to try to solve this problem. Techniques of openness and negotiation. So he is seen as being a positive PR father of everything that we do today. Before I go through the tips on this slide that Ivy Lee gave us, I wanted to also remind you to check out page 50 in your textbook. It talks about how Lee advised the Rockefellers on their dealings with the coal industry. There was a lot of worker abuse and worker mistreatment of workers. There were miners in Colorado who fought against that. There was a struggle. There was some people killed. Children and families were being involved in it. So it was a lot of bad things that were happening to the workers. So the Rockefellers hired Ivy Lee to come in and advise them. They wanted to do some advertisements about the whole situation. He advised against that, said we don't want to use those kind of techniques. We want to be open and honest and listen to the workers. So he really promoted two-way communication. And he also sent the Rockefellers out to actually meet with their workers so that they could understand their viewpoint. So he was really very much a liaison between the Rockefellers and the workers. So some of the suggestions that he came up with at that time and that we should still follow today is that, number one, business should align with the public interest. So business should be concerned about what's happening to their workers, how their employees are being treated, should be concerned about their environmental impact, things like that we hear about a lot today. Second, management must support the PR program. The corporate executives need to be the ones on the ground sharing their feelings, sharing the strategy, sharing what their company is wanting to do. Many times when there's a tragedy, a crisis, maybe a plane crashes, one of the first things that needs to happen is that the CEO or the top leader of that aircraft company, whether it be Boeing or whatever, needs to be on the ground and be representative and be able to make statements and to listen to people who have been affected by this and be the lead voice, the lead person for your company. The next was to convert industry towards openness. So no longer were we using hype and puffery and fluff. We needed to communicate the truth and communicate it honestly. And next, that he also said we need to humanize business and be good neighbors. And that is something that you're seeing a lot of businesses and corporations do today, where they are taking some active social and cultural issues and embracing them. Patagonia is an example of that. They've done a lot to promote environmental causes, the ways that we treat our land and things like that. So they've really identified with that cause, and many of their customers support them and buy their products because they know that Patagonia is also helping our climate and helping the world as well. Okay. And next, Henry Ford. We all know about Henry Ford being here in Detroit. Many say that he was maybe a greater publicist than a mechanic. He was one of the first to go and race his cars against other cars manufacturers. It was a way to promote his cars, to get people excited about them. He would be interviewed on any subject. He was very open about that. He also positioned a product where he would position his product against a competitor and show the differences in those things. And he was also the first major industrialist to hire minorities in large numbers. Now, we do know that he wasn't a perfect person. He was anti-Semitic and had a lot of other issues and problems, but he did do some positive things as well. And he did, as we know, right here in our city, brought lots of people from other parts of the country, gave them a living wage so that they could establish families, build homes, drive cars, commute, all those type of things. Many people say he's the father of the middle class because he was providing the right type of money that people needed to have a nice life and also to buy his cars as well. He knew that if he paid the workers more, they would be able to save money and buy cars as well. World War I happened around this time, and the President Monroe was seeking support for the war, people to buy bonds, people, persuading Americans to save food, support the war effort. So they used a strategy of not necessarily criticizing and attacking the Germans in the way that they did this. They were just asking people to support the war effort and to support the U.S. government, and using these various techniques to help them do that. And so Creel was the head of this committee. Edward Bernays, who we'll talk about, also served on this committee as well. So after the war was over, before the Second World War, a lot of these men at the time, they had been trained in how to communicate and trained in information. So many of them came back after the war, and charitable organizations started hiring them to communicate their needs, communicate to their audiences about their charity, trying to raise money and volunteers and all of those type of things. Then Edward Bernays, who I mentioned a couple slides ago, he was on the Creel Committee. He also wrote the first book on PR, Crystallizing Public Opinion, in 1923. It really illuminated the function of PR, the strategies that we should use, the techniques, and really started laying a foundation for the industry of public relations. He also taught the first college PR course at New York University. Some of his techniques that he used were, and we will, in your discussion forum this week, we're going to look at an REI promotion that they did. And I want you to kind of think about Edward Bernays and what he did way back when, and how that kind of is similar to what REI did with their Opt Outside campaign. But Edward Bernays, he was hired by Procter & Gamble to sell Ivory soap. And instead of just doing advertising, of course, they were doing lots of advertising, But he decided to have a contest and to have people enter. He would advertise the contest. People around the nation would sculpt their soap into different shapes. There would be a contest. They could send in, their sculptures and win a prize. But all of this was also selling Ivory soap. It was promoting Procter and Gamble as well. So it was an event that he created to benefit his client. Another one is that he was hired by a company that made hairnets. And so he first tried to get women to wear their hair longer so that they would need to wear hairnets. And then that didn't really work, so he switched it to a matter of safety, and that food workers need to, for sanitary reasons, those working in manufacturing for safety reasons needed to use hairnets. So he was able to increase the sale of hairnets by just emphasizing them and how they could be used in different ways than people had already thought about. In 1929, it was Light's Golden Jubilee, and he arranged for electrical companies around the world to all turn off their electricity for a minute in 1929 at the same time to celebrate the fact that they had electricity. I can't imagine this ever happening today because we could not, a minute without our electricity. We have to reset all of our machines, our computers. We don't have our wireless. So I don't think this would work today, but it definitely worked then and brought a lot of publicity just to the anniversary of the light bulb. During World War II, of course, there was lots of problems in our country, depression, the Great Depression, and then, of course, the war. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, I was getting his first two names mixed up. He was a great PR man. He was the first president to really use the advent of radio, and he would have these fireside chats. You probably can, if you look it up, you can see photos of families sitting around their radio listening to the president talk about the war, the economic status of what was going on in the country. They hired a lot of PR people for the Office of War Information to communicate what was happening in the war, to travel with the different military units to send information back to America. So corporate PR, 1945 to present. This was after the war is over, World War II. Many businesses at that time began in-house PR. We had radio, newspapers, magazines, and of course TV was just now getting off the ground. It had been delayed a little bit because of the war, but people were starting to buy TVs and use TVs. So there were a lot of PR information people that were left over from the war and needed jobs. And so since this time, PR has grown about 400% in this era. And so this is really when we see the industry really starting as a strategic, corporate, planned type industry. So we've had an evolving practice and philosophy from press agentry, where people were just trying to use any kind of means to sell tickets, to more public information, such as during the war. In the 1950s and 60s, it became about building relationships with consumers. In the 70s and 80s, we had an even more managerial approach to PR. And probably what we're seeing now is more relationship management, where companies and organizations and businesses and nonprofits and any kind of institution is trying to have some type of relationship with their different audiences. So if you look at an institution like Rochester University, think about all the audiences that our university has. We have students, and you can even break down students into traditional to accelerated to online learning students. We have employees and staff and faculty. We have alumni. We have prospective students. We have the city that we're in, relationships with the city of Rochester Hills and with the county, with all of our politicians that represent us in this area. We have different faith-based organizations that we have relationships with. So you can see, I've already just listed off about 6 or 7 different audiences that a small institution like Rochester University needs to be able to communicate to those audiences. And that is done mostly through relationship management. So 4 models of PR that we've kind of gone through is the press agentry, where it was all about publicity. It was all about selling tickets or getting awareness about a circus coming to town. Then it went to mostly public information, the Ivy Lee era, where it was just more about being open and honest and just sending out information, which was a good positive step. Then it became two-way asymmetric, where organizations started wanting feedback, but they were using that feedback mostly to figure out how to persuade people. They weren't really listening and maybe changing the way they were operating or changing their plans. And now it's much more symmetric, where there's more balance of power, where it's two-way, where we want, as a PR person for any institution or any business, we want to be able to communicate our viewpoint, but also to listen to all of our different audiences and make changes and listen to what they're wanting and needing from us. All right, trends in today's practice of PR: being open, transparent. The worst thing you can do is try to hide something. It will always get found out. Social media has dramatically changed public relations. We'll have a whole chapter on that in a few weeks. Evaluation: we always need to stop, and even though we need to evaluate, if we do have a REI opt-out side campaign, we need to stop a few months later and evaluate, did that work? Who did we reach? Did our sales increase? How do people feel about us? So evaluation is a very important part of public relations. As we all know, we have a 24/7 news cycle with Twitter. Every single second something coming out on Twitter. The cable news channels. People are we are so bombarded with information that it is 24/7. So if news goes out or a crisis happens, you have to respond immediately. You cannot wait, or someone else is going to take over that story. They're going to shape the story to their viewpoint and maybe not to your company's viewpoint. So in mass media is going lots of new directions. We have to focus now on bloggers, social media. It's not just about the traditional media anymore. Many companies are outsourcing their PR to PR agencies and firms, and lifelong learning. As I've said before, the internet didn't even exist. When I went to college, I was writing everything. Computers were being that's when we started using computers, was towards the end of my college years. So it's important to be a lifelong learner and to continue adapting to all the new technologies and strategies that we have out there. So some things that PR continues to grow. There's a lot of large institutions, and they have a sense of responsibility. They're understanding that it does help the bottom line to be responsible, to be a responsible neighbor to your different audiences. There's a lot of interest groups out there now that are, so there's conflicts between interest groups that might affect your company. I mean, we'll look at lots of examples. We could look at Nike and Colin Kaepernick, and a lot of other companies that have been involved in some of our social issues today and how it's affected the company. We have sophisticated communications now, so people are very aware of what companies are doing. We also have a spread of global democracy that's been happening, maybe not happening as much now as it was 5 years ago. It's changing a little bit. And the growth of the internet has really been the main major factor on public relations. So if you're a PR major and you're interested in doing this as a career, you do need to know about the Public Relations Society of America. It is the largest national public relations organization in the world, and I've got a link to it there. It's prsa.org. Just a place that helps PR people know the professional standards. There's lots of ethical advice, tools that you can use through the PRSA. So I recommend that you check that out. There's also IABC, which is the International Association of Business Communications. It's the second largest. Just another one I wanted to mention that you may want to check out as well. Both of these places provide lots of good resources and information when you're working on projects for your classes as well. So we're going to take a break, and then I'll be back to talk about Chapter 4. Okay, so for Chapter 4, it's about how, today's practice of public relations. And I only have about 5 minutes to stay within my 30 minutes, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, just hit some highlights here. You can, of course, read your chapter and go through these slides. I have them posted where you can also see the slides just without watching the video, so you can go back to them. It's important that a firm or an organization's top manager is involved in the PR process, because that person will be the chief spokesperson. They're the main booster of your organization, and they defend your reputation when there might be a crisis that's happening. So PR people are a boundary role. They are really pretty much a liaison between the organization and the different publics. So yes, you work for an organization, but you're also representing your publics and communicating what they are thinking back to the top leaders of your organization. For some reason, my photo didn't come up there, but so it is important that a PR department have a direct access to top management. There doesn't need to be a lot of layers in between, because the top management really needs to hear from the PR people, because the PR people are the ones who should be monitoring and listening to all the different audiences so that they can communicate all of that back to the CEO. Today, about half of all PR departments report directly to the CEO. And I know that when a few years ago, the then president at Rochester University was making some changes, and he asked me to take over the communication services office. And I asked him, I said, well, if I do this, who am I reporting to? And so we got it worked out where I, reported directly to him. So that was a good step for us, where I had direct connection to him during that time. So PR needs to know what's happening in an organization, but they also need to know what audiences are saying. And I always want to, remember to do the right thing. We always want to promote that idea within your organization. Our number one thing is we need to do the right thing. Whatever that thing is, we need to do the right thing. So a management should value PR because it will help them build good relationships. Over a survey of over 200 organizations found that most CEOs said that PR had 184% return on investment, meaning the amount of money that they invested in their PR department, they were getting 184% back. So they saw that it was very worthwhile for them. So most CEOs, they really want communication that is strategic, research-based, and two-way. So they're relying on a PR person to help them do that. So reputation management, I mentioned a little bit about that a few slides ago. It's all about an organization's reputation, whether it be their brand, their goodwill, their image, their position in the marketplace. I think this is this is the Harris Poll of corporate reputation rankings. In 2019, it was Wegmans, which is a grocery store that we don't have in this area. I've been in one, and they're really super nice. Amazon is up there. Patagonia, who I mentioned earlier, LL Bean, and Walt Disney all had good reputations from the different people that were surveyed. The fastest rising and falling, biggest improvements: Samsung, Sony, 21st Century Fox, the Home Depot, and Procter & Gamble. The biggest declines, which I think is what's really interesting, is Facebook, Tesla, McDonald's, Target, and Nike. So I think that's interesting. There's a lot of different reasons probably why they've had some reputational decline. But I think it's interesting to keep an eye on that and see what's happening, around the nation and with different companies. So reputation is very important. A company with a good reputation can charge premium prices. I'm a devoted Apple user, being in this industry since 1985, when we started having desktop publishing with all the different software that was happening at that time. You could only really do it on a Mac. So I from the very beginning, I've been using Apples and Macs when they were really expensive and it wasn't cool, but I am a loyal user of them, and so I'm willing to pay a little bit more now, even to continue using the Apple products. If you have a good reputation, you have greater access to new markets and capital, and you have word of mouth endorsement from your audiences, and you really have an identity that can't be duplicated by another organization. So I like this quote from Warren Buffett: we can afford to lose money even a lot of money, but we cannot afford to lose reputation, not even a shred of reputation. So customer relationship management, PR people are doing that, having dialogue and conversation with all their different audiences to try to improve upon that relationship. PR departments, if you work in a PR department, you could work for a corporation, a university, which is where mine mostly have been, hospitals, sports franchises, nonprofit. Many companies call that corporate communications. And PR departments have the big ones have specialized sections. Some people just do media relations. Some work on community service and community relations. Others work with HR and work on employee communications, and others might even be working with government and be more like working with lobbyists and things like that. General Motors, as an example, has more than 300 PR personnel worldwide. That's a lot. So most huge corporations have smaller departments, an average of 9 professionals with a budget of about $3.5 million. GM has much more than that. So if you're working for a PR department, such as inside a corporation, the benefits are that you are on the inside, you are a member of the team, you know what's happening in the company because you're there every day. The drawbacks is that you may not be as appreciated by the top management because they're used to you. Sometimes they like to hear other voices. And you can also get tunnel vision where you don't really accurately see how other audiences are seeing your company. So a lot of companies are outsourcing. Almost 90% of Fortune 500 companies do use some type of outside PR counsel. It might be for just a special project, or it could be a long-term relationship. That helps them get a perspective and insight into the market, and so they rely a lot on PR agencies. So PR agencies, this would be a business that has many different clients, and they're doing PR work for the different clients. When I was working at an ad agency, I was the director of PR, and I had different clients that I did their PR work for them. It was Big Boy Restaurants, it was Source One Mortgage, it was Kelly Assisted Living. So I was, on a daily basis thinking about what press releases, what do I need to be doing for that client today? So PR firms can offer that diverse services, and they have a counseling aspect. They're professionals. So a lot of companies rely on them. Instead of having an in-house PR person, they will work with outside agencies. And there's a lot in this area because, of course, Detroit has so many major corporations here, especially in the auto industry. And so we have a lot of PR agencies that work specifically in the automobile manufacturing industry. So why do some companies use PR agencies and others don't? Well, there's some advantages and disadvantages. Again, if the advantages, those people are objective, they're looking at it from outside, they may have more of a global reach than if it's someone just within your company. But they have a part-time commitment to your company. They may not know exactly the ins and outs of your company, and so it might take them a long time to get up to speed. There could be a high cost to hire a PR agency. So you can read through those advantages and disadvantages to see more about that. PR agencies do a lot of different things. They do research, they write, they do community relations, they do special events, all of those type of things. Some of the typical strategies that a PR person will do, they're just doing it within an agency for different clients. All right, so it looks like that was the last slide. So we are done. Thanks for listening. See you next week.